So last month I had filmed a video on what I thought were some of the ugliest Disney pins. I'm pretty happy that that video got a rather positive response, or at least feel a little better that a lot of people seem to also dislike Vinylmations as much as I do. But also in that video I sent out a call for people to send me in pictures of ugly Disney pins that they'd come across. I said if I received enough submissions I'd make a follow-up video, and here I am today with a video on more ugly Disney pins featuring pins submitted by you. I'm going to link to my original video in the description and then also up here, but you don't have to see that one for this one to make sense. I'll just emphasize again that this is fully subjective. It is totally okay to like any of these pins. Just because the pins are included here doesn't mean they're inherently bad in any way. They're just ones that may not be so universally liked. So I'm joined once again by Robert Pinback, who kind of was a pin trading mascot, and I've kind of adopted him as the mascot for my ugly Disney pins. And so before I get into all the pins that were submitted to me, I do quickly want to share a few pins that I found that I came across in between when I filmed my last video and this one that I wanted to share. And most of them are actually relatively recent releases. So the first pin that I wanted to start off is a Cinderella Father's Day pin from the Disney Studio Store Hollywood. It's not too bad when you first look at it, but then as you pay closer attention to the details, things kind of look a little bit off. Most importantly is her father's hand that she's holding onto. The way that it's depicted and it kind of looks, it almost looks like his arm is twisted the other way and it's his pinky out there. So that artwork for that hand just did not really turn out too well. The dad's eyes are just totally closed and Cinderella just kind of has a blob mouth. So this is one where the details just weren't quite there. Next up, I have some pins that were relatively recently released from Box Lunch. These were ones that I do remember seeing some criticism online for. So first we have this Jasmine and Aladdin pin, and obviously what's kind of off with them is that their skin tone looks very, very light. Their skin tone basically is pretty much about the same as like Aladdin's white suit. So that one did not turn out too well. And then we have this Pocahontas pin here, and she kind of has crazy eyes. Those just did not get drawn very well, and then she also has a super teeny tiny mouth. So these are definitely not amongst the best of Box Lunch's pins. Next, I also wanted to include these relatively new pins from Hong Kong Disneyland. This is their Halloween mystery set for this year. And now normally I love pins from Hong Kong, they are such nice quality, but I just really wasn't a fan of the designs for these pins. It's the characters all shaped like pumpkins, but their eyes and features are just like these cogs, and some are buttons. There's kind of like a zipper for a mouth, and so it's more so that they just like look kind of scary to me. I mean, I think these would definitely be good for like scary looking Halloween pins, but I unfortunately was not a super huge fan of this release. Now these next and last pins that I wanted to share are definitely going to be a little bit controversial because I know these are very popular, but I think that the Rapunzel and Ariel Stunning Silhouette pins are kind of ugly. Now I'll say I think the Belle Stunning Silhouette pin is beautiful because it has her profile. And it's a great design, but with the Rapunzel and Ariel pins, it's just like blank, dead black faces. I think that if they had made these pins also just kind of more of a full profile, that they would have looked a lot better. But I really just don't like how they came out. For how popular they've been, I think there are a lot of other pins that are a lot prettier. But I do also understand that these are some of the only low limited edition releases that are kind of accessible to everybody through Shop Disney. These are ones I kind of feel are ugly, and also the way that the face shape is drawn is pretty much the exact same between these two. So I do not quite like these. But now we're going to start with some submissions that were sent in. So first, there are these Mulan pins that were sent in by Janice. So these are pins that are perhaps a little bit more subtle, and it's more so details that are off with them, faces that just don't look quite right. So these are pins that all kind of seem to have eye problems with Mulan. This middle one, she doesn't even really have one of her eyes. This one here, they're a little bit messed up. And then she also has some really off missing pupils in that one. As well, Janice also sent in this Mulan pin, which again, it's Mulan and she's just not quite looking like herself. So it's kind of like a Flynn Rider problem where they just can't quite get those face features drawn correctly. Next up, we have some submissions from Kyle, And Kyle sent in a number of pins. I'm going to start off with this one because this really is one I should have included in my last video because I talked about the racers pins. And this one probably is the ugliest of all those race car pins. This is the Kermit Race Car Pin, and just about everything about this pin is really weird. He has like his little arms over the front wheels. He still just has his full mouth, his eyes wide open. This is just a straight up ugly Disney pin. Next, Kyle sent along this Tarzan and Jane pin, and this one is kind of frightening based on how Tarzan and Jane look. Their faces don't really look anything like themselves. They look so squished in, almost like narrow potatoes. These again are like the knockoff version of Tarzan and Jane. Kyle also sent in this relatively new Ducktales pin and these pins here, which I don't even really know how to describe. This Ducktales pin features the new style of Ducktales animation, which I personally am not so much a fan of. So you definitely have to be into that style of animation to like it. And as well, some of the eyes in the pin are a little bit buggy. And then there's this set of pins here, which, like I said, I don't even know how to describe them. I don't know what they're supposed to be, and I don't think I've ever seen them before. What I do know is that they're definitely weird looking and kind of ugly. Then there were two more sent in by Kyle that were villain pins. And the first was this Maleficent kind of cuties style pin, but she looks more like a melted cutie. It's definitely an interesting design choice for that. And then we have this Mother Gothel cutie. She's also kind of a character that just doesn't quite look right in cutie's form. Next up, we have some pins sent in by Rosanna, and she sent in another Vinylmation pin. This one is a turkey Vinylmation. There really are Vinylmations for any kind of weird design you can think of. And then she also sent in this Star Wars kind of Dia de los Muertos, or more of like a sugar skull styled stormtrooper skull. So I didn't think the stormtrooper was too bad at first, but then I started to look at it more and more. And what kind of feels pretty off about it is that this up here is the mouth on kind of the sugar skull aspect, but the actual stormtrooper mouth I think is down there. So then it just started to do kind of like weird tricks with my mind. So I feel like that one is maybe more of a slow burn weird. Rosanna also sent along these pins that I'd never seen before, and these are fantastic because their faces are so ugly. These apparently were some form of princess carousel pins. And their faces, they look like they're little pea heads. The heads are so tiny so they can't have any detail on them. It's like if you got an actual pea and then tried to draw a face on it. It just did not turn out well. Next, I have some submissions from someone who I only know whose name starts with an N, since I got these in with email, but they sent in this Disney Grins mystery set. These ones are just kind of weird because there's just bearing so much teeth. Like, they're just not really attractive pins, which I guess technically makes them ugly pins then. I am okay with the Dumbo, the Kronk, and the Thumper, but the rest of them really are not looking so good. She also sent in the same Mulan pin that Janice sent in, so clearly there's some consensus that this Mulan is not looking too good. And then there's this Aladdin and Jasmine pin, and they kind of have the same Tarzan and Jane problem where they look a little bit like deformed potatoes, and then the eyes on their faces are also super small. Next up is a pin that has a lot of problems with it. This was sent in by Venus. This actually was a Lilo and Stitch pin I'd never seen before, but there's so much off with the design of this one. This again is like where they're just total knockoff characters. Lilo only has one eye. Her arms are like in this crazy Frankenstein-like pose, like she's gonna do the monster mash or something. And Stitch, I don't know how his body parts even proportionally work with how they're supposed to be. This pin is definitely certified ugly. Next up, Drew sent in another Vinylmation pin, and I definitely think this is a fantastically ugly Vinylmation pin. This one features Mrs. Potts. So Mrs. Potts has chip on her ears, and then she also has some plates on her feet. Mrs. Potts is a very specific shape, that's kind of her thing, and And so when you kind of try and put her design on the weird vinylmation form, it ends up looking pretty wonky. Next, I got a submission from someone on Instagram. All I know is their screen name was related to Mooey Moo. I wasn't able to see their actual name, but they sent in this lanyard starter set that featured these kind of weird forms of cuties on ride vehicles. They said most of the other pins in the set they're fine with, which I agree with, but specifically they didn't like the Minnie or Mickey. And there's definitely a lot of cutie versions of Minnie and Mickey out there, but I do agree that these ones are kind of ugly. They look like these weird baby versions of themselves, so they're not so much of cuties. These more so, I'd say, look like the off-brand Times Square version of Minnie and Mickey. Next up, I got quite a number of some pretty awesome submissions from Crystal. So this first Mickey here is actually a pretty classic fake pin, and I think a lot of people who end up getting it are like, what the heck is this even? It's supposed to be in a set of comedy and tragedy drama masks, but in the shape of Mickey Mouse. This one obviously is tragedy, and all I can say about this pin is that it is pretty tragic indeed. Next, there is a Mickey Mouse statue, but made out of cheese, or at least made out of cheese in pin form. This is kind of one of those pins where you think, does there really need to be a pin of Mickey Mouse made out of cheese? I'm not quite sure there needs to be. Here we have some Nightmare Before Christmas pins sent in by Crystal, and these are like, oof. First off, there's this Oogie Boogie hidden Mickey pin, and like, Oogie Boogie's looking pretty slim. Like, he's so tiny and straight there. Like, isn't Oogie Boogie supposed to be a little bit wide? His face on there also is just not looking too hot. Like, I understand that this is supposed to be the one where he's kind of turning the popcorn barrel, but that is not a good look on Oogie. Then over here we have this Jack Skellington pin. I think it's supposed to be a Jack meets Easter pin. And this Jack face actually looks kind of similar to this Mickey tragedy mask. So this Jack face is also kind of tragic looking too. And then I want to end on this final pin sent in by Crystal because this pin kind of is a thing of nightmares. And so she found and sent in this Cheshire Cat Pin. This pin says quite mad on it, and I think I can agree that it is. I think this is a thing that kind of could actually haunt your nightmares, which I guess kind of fits on brand with Cheshire Cat. But if you wanted to find something that was just a straight up ugly Disney pin, this is pretty much it. So those were all the additional ugly Disney pins I had to share. I hope you also enjoyed looking through these interesting designs. But as always, it's totally cool to like these pins. This is all just fully lighthearted, and it kind of shows just how hard it can be to get design right. I'm sure there are tons of more ugly Disney pins out there, so you can always feel free to send pictures of them along to me. And if I get more ugly Disney pins in, I can always make a third video in this series. But thanks for watching!